Very pleased to be introducing our speaker today, who has been so involved in this project all along the way. And I hear that maybe you just submitted your manuscript for this book,
That's
so we're
right.
really
Yes.
This is our it's hot off the presses. This is a very exciting day. I'm pleased to introduce Ariana Mangual Figueroa, who is the Associate Professor for Latin American, Iberian, and Latino Cultures and Urban Education. And her field is language socialization and linguistic anthropology, which is really a cool and unique area. She seeks to understand the ways in which the lives of children and adults in mixed status families are shaped by citizenship status and schooling practices during everyday routine interactions. And that is so interesting too, because it's about really the lives of people, the everyday lives of people. And her work has appeared in a number of journals. I was recently at the Council of Great City Schools Bilingual Immigrant and Refugee meeting in Greensboro, and you were quoted in some of the presentations there, and it was, I know her. And so she's, in addition to this project, she's also involved in a longitudinal research project called Putting Immigration and Education into Conversation Every Day, which is really what needs to happen if we're going to make an impact, right? And so one of the other things that I wanted to say about Ariana is that she's a teacher and a professor. So she has been an ESL and bilingual teacher, and so she comes from a point of research and practice and how those two things jive. So I'm very pleased, without further ado, to introduce Ariana.
Thank you, Tammy. What a beautiful introduction. I'm honored, I'm humbled, I'm really pleased to be talking with you. And you know, I want to say that when Tatiana and Daniela and I were talking about the agenda, we were thinking purposefully about the order of events today. And there were many different configurations, but we decided that it was important that you all speak first, because you are the experts, and that we are here together to make meaning, to make sense of the world and our place within it, and the young people and students and families that we love and care for and teach. So I want to say that I am humbled because I've been learning from you all morning, and so I want to share something that I hope, in the spirit of what PS 340 was saying, I want to share something that I hope will be the seed for further conversation, right? And that will be a tool, as a book can be, a tool, an artifact, a text that can spark the kinds of conversations that you are already having in your schools and districts, and give us all a way to continue those conversations with folks not as fluent in the issues, concerns, cares that we share. So, of course, I have the presentation, and now I have the podium, which I asked for because I have notes, but I've also been taking notes throughout the day, and so I want to just read back some of the things I've heard, and I also will do that throughout the talk in the hopes that you will hear yourself in this work as well. So in terms of who's in the room, right, I was jotting down all of the titles you all shared this morning. Literacy coach, third grade dual language teacher, PI, principal investigator, co-principal investigator, principal, third grade gen ed teacher, third grade teacher, second grade ENL teacher, partner school team leader, administrative assistant, ESL and GED teacher, associate investigator, professor, teacher, project director, and dual language teacher. And so as I think about the power and the capacity and the perspectives that those titles represent, it's joyful to think about the capacity and the power we have amongst us. And I also want to name that we are nested within CUNY-IIE's broader work, right? On policy, change, on professional development through CTLE, on the leadership of our directly impacted colleagues at undocumented EDU, and on piloting an immigrant liaison project to institutionalize change citywide, right? And so, and to be a model for change that can happen throughout the state. So we are sort of standing in our own footing and then thinking about how we sit within the broader initiative, which is tremendous. And I'm thinking of today, I'm thinking of the sunset of Title 42, which arose out of the pandemic moment and was a way of continuing to further exclude or restrict movement between nation states, which are constructions, right? Which are ideas, which are constructions and formulations that are humanly created and that get renegotiated over time and in different ways. I'm thinking about, with the sunset of Title 42, the roles that our cities play in welcoming and also in rejecting immigrant populations. And I'm thinking about the role you play as teachers, who are some of the first people to receive new community members when they do arrive in our cities. And as Jay mentioned in relation to Rochester and the children's schools, that you really see firsthand the shifts in immigration policy, in municipal policy in your classrooms and communities daily. So what I hope is that as we move into this talk and continue the conversations, we'll be connecting these different domains, right? We've talked to some, or in the background of everything we're saying is this bubble of immigration policy. We've been talking about education pedagogy, and then about humanizing students and families, right? And among all of you who presented today, those who are leading the initiative and who are facilitating today bring so much, and I've learned so much from them about all of these domains. So Maite's translanguaging work, Cecilia's strength-based approaches in the education pedagogy, and they all intersect, right? Sara's narratives of immigrant and undocumented youth, and the stories they tell us through writing and through talk, Tatiana's multimedia work across borders, Daniela's work at the Center for Migration Studies, and so all of these intersections of policy, pedagogy, and humanity, right? So the talk is titled Speech or Silence, Rights, Risks, and Responsibilities in the Public Education of Students from Mixed Status Communities. And thank you, to everyone as we move into this next part of the conversation. So it's a brief talk that comes from this forthcoming book that Tammy mentioned. It's been a long time coming, and you'll see on the next slide just how long I've been working on developing this text, tentatively titled Knowing Silences, What Children Can Teach Us About Citizenship and Schooling. It'll come out next spring, so spring 2024. You have to take the long view, right, on these projects. But it'll come out in an exciting way. In the University of Minnesota Press, so it'll be printed like a book that we will see here on our shelves. I'm joining good company here. And then it'll also be an ebook, and it'll exist in a platform called Manifold. And so what it means is that it will be available free. It will be available online on our devices. And what it means in part is that all of the artifacts of student work, the audio that accompanies the transcripts that will be in the book, the posters with Post-its that wouldn't reproduce this big but can be seen online are things that I can include in the Manifold version. And it also means that it's part of the press's accessibility initiative, so it will have, it will be read also for folks who are visually impaired. And so I think it will be accessible in ways that I can't yet imagine, but I'm excited to consider and prepare for. So it has these two basic premises, the book, right? These two basic arguments that children know about the realities and risks associated with undocumented status and immigration status more broadly. And they children share what they know in speech and in writing, and also through their silences and what they don't say, or what they don't write. And as an ethnographer, as a linguistic anthropologist, my way of working is to spend time in schools, to spend time in families' homes, and to listen. And one of the ways in which I've worked in this project over 10 years, and in particular in the 2 years I'll talk about today, is to have children wear iPod touches, or recorders, essentially. But recorders that are familiar to them, that look like a phone, right? And record their talk throughout the school day. And because I have the luxury of being an ethnographer, Salud, I've been able to re-listen to those audio over and over and over. And so I can hear not only what children say, but I can also hear what children don't say, and when they're quiet, and when they choose not to speak or write. And the book argues that those moments are also really important for us to consider, because they tell us how children understand the risks and responsibilities about disclosing or disguising immigration status. So here's just a snapshot. It was 10 years of this book project. I started the project with funding from the Spencer Foundation, National Academy of Education, as a postdoctoral fellow in 2013. And I would say the book has reached a culmination now in 2023, now that it has been submitted. There are 6 girls from mixed status families who formed the core of the project within a 5th grade dual language classroom in Brooklyn. So their peers also consented to being part of it, but the focus was on these 6 girls in particular. I audio recorded, I took images, pictures of student work, documented curriculum over the course of the year, and then made home visits as well. And the 6 girls are from 3 countries of origin, El Salvador, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic. And so I met them in 5th grade. We stayed together very closely as sort of the formal part of the data collection through 5th and 6th grade, so that transition from elementary to middle school. And then I've now known them for 10 years because we didn't let each other go. Neither them of me and me of them, right? And so our relationship has shifted and they've become co-researchers. I've been a mentor. These photos are telling. This is in many ways actually, but the one at the top left in black and white is an image from 5th grade when I would go to their classroom and we would meet after school to analyze the audio recordings that I had made during the school day. Very early on when they started wearing these iPod touches, they would say, Miss Ariana, I said a secret at around 10 a.m. and so you can't listen to that one. Or they would say, Miss Ariana, I don't want to wear it at lunch, but I will wear it in the classroom. Or they would say, we just want to hear what you are getting here, and can we talk about it? And so they insisted at the ages of 9 and 10 on becoming co-researchers with me and co-analysts. And they taught me a tremendous amount about the ethics of research, right? That informed consent is not one moment when they sign a document and say, yes, record me. Informed consent is this ongoing, right? Continuous process. So that was us then, and you can tell there's work I'm doing to anonymize who they are. Their faces are not as visible as they are now in 2023, where in last week 3 of the 6 co-presented with me at Fordham University for their 4th annual Margaret Mead lecture. And they were quite visible and quite who they are. These 3 in particular are sophomores in CUNY. One is here at City College and 2 are part of the Macaulay Honors College at Lehman and then at Brooklyn College. And so our talk was a riff off of Margaret Mead's book, Coming of Age in Samoa, is coming of age in mixed status families. So that to me is marks a decade for sure. And all of you who are so astute and attuned to the lives of immigrant people in this country can infer from that 10-year span what political changes, what policy changes the young people have lived through and continue to today. So in this talk, I'm going to be really thinking about the grounding principles as well, and 3 in particular. The immigration experience is complicated, xenophobia is systemic, and that we aim to move beyond allyship to accomplices. And I know these came up at your tables and in your presentations, and so we're very much on the same page. My goal today, very much aligned with how Sarah presented our day in terms of a humanizing approach, is to work towards breaking silences around immigration status and education in order to understand its impact, immigration status, on students and families and even perhaps ourselves. And so 3 parts. I'm going to tell you just a little tiny bit more about who I am, what the policy context is in terms of Plyler versus Doe and schooling in particular, and then we'll hear also from some of the young people when they were in fact children. So I am Puerto Rican. I grew up here in New York City. I grew up in Inwood to the north, and I went to elementary school in El Barrio to our south and east because my mom was a literacy coach in the neighborhood, and there was a school that she thought would be a good place for me to grow, right across the street from the Museo del Barrio, if you know that stretch on 5th Avenue. And in my elementary school, we opened every elementary school assembly singing 3 national anthems. So we would sing the Puerto Rican national anthem, and that line, Cuando sus playas llegó Colón, was an important part of that storytelling of our colonial relationship. We would sing the African American national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us is a line that always really echoed with me in thinking about the past and the present. And then the U.S. national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. And so thinking about the construction of nationhood and its promise and possibility, and also the violence and exclusion that goes with that, the conflict. And I would say that the singing of these three national anthems was not something I realized was unique, right? This was how I was going to school, and so that we started everyone, and we had the flag bearers would hold multiple flags, including the Puerto Rican flag, when they came onto the stage, and we would rise and sing. And I would say that as a sort of window into who I am, I think I can safely say I've spent the rest of my life trying to reconcile the coexistence of these three national anthems, right? How did they what messages did they tell me all at once, right, about Puerto Ricanness, about blackness, about US-ness, and my place in it. And so I think my life's work and my life's curiosity has been about how can they coexist? And what does it mean that as a kid I was growing up singing them and learning from their messages, explicit and implicit. So to think specifically about the families that I've been working with for so long, and who, again, in really humbling ways as a Boricua, New York, Puerto Rican, who've opened their homes to me and who've, been so generous and trusting with me, and who I've learned from both in terms of being a U.S. citizen, but also being aware of what the complications are of U.S. citizenship, even growing up Puerto Rican. So to zero in on these families in particular, they're mixed status families, right? And so they're families in which, in one household composition, there are different immigration statuses, ranging from U.S.-born citizen to undocumented, and recognizing the importance of considering that these categories are in flux, right? That one can be in the process of obtaining or of losing a visa. And that these categories have shifted in historical time. Who counted as a U.S. citizen has changed and continues to shift, right? And then it's important to just have that sort of grounding in how citizenship works in the U.S., which is that it's jus soli citizenship, or it's the right of birthplace, right? Which is not necessary. It's not a universal way of constructing citizenship at the national level, but is an important part of how we determine who is in and who's out, right? All the things that entails in this country. So in 2021, more than 22 million people in this country lived in mixed status households, and at least a quarter of these were children. And of course these numbers shift and are imperfect given our systems of understanding demographics and of gathering information, but a quarter of them were children, and 6.1 million of them were US born, right? Many were undocumented as well. And these young people in this project were very representative of young people in mixed status families over the last 2 decades, which is that the younger children in the family were US born citizens, and the older children were undocumented, right? So as you think about changes at the border, it also has changed how families come, whether they choose to return or not, or can make those choices with much agency. So I want you to just take a moment. I'll do this just twice or 3 times throughout the talk, but just for a minute, what firsthand experiences from your own life, personally, and or in your role as an educator, do these terms and statistics bring to life? Kind of popcorning in your own mind. So I'll keep moving, and you can keep jotting and thinking, of course, and we'll keep talking. Now we know from your work, from your presentations, and we know from research, that national citizenship status intersects with other things, right? We know to take an intersectional approach to understanding children and families in the world. So your citizenship status, right, intersects with things like one's ability to obtain quality medical attention and nutritional support. Children's social emotional well-being when they fear for or experience their loved one's detention or deportation, and young people's ability to attend or afford college, just to name 3 things that of course are intersecting with other things like housing, rent, and food, and the other things that you mentioned in your talks. And yet, given how complex the immigration experience is, most of the academic literature on citizenship and education suggests that children remain ignorant of their loved ones on immigration status until they reach milestones in adolescence, like applying for a driver's license, applying for a worker's permit, or applying for a FAFSA, right? And the book sort of project more broadly takes that up. And as an ethnographer, I know and have witnessed firsthand how much children know, and that's where we're going, and that's what you know from your work. So how is it that there's a disconnect? And I argue it's methodological, right? One thing is to ask interview respondents directly, what does it mean to be a citizen, or when did you first have troubles, or what strengths do you draw from your immigration experience, and assume that a person can report that. And another thing, as you know, is to ask a child, or even allow a child the freedom to draw a family tree, or talk about things that they're proud of, and how their experiences come from there. So that's where the book really hopes to weigh in the academic literature. So when I first started this work, though, you figure this particular project started in 2013. I'd been a professor for 3 years at Rutgers University in New Jersey. I did my dissertation in 2010 and went and got my PhD, started my PhD in 2005. And at that time, when I was first meeting mixed status families, turns out I had known them all along, right? But it wasn't really until as a Puerto Rican going to California to do my doctorate that I came to understand the broader pan-Latino politics and borders constructed differently, like in geographical senses than the Caribbean one. Turns out, at that time, there were very few people talking about mixed status families, right? And I'm in good company here that we've been thinking about them together, and the research of our colleagues here too. But it's interesting that in 2010 was one of the first sort of clips that I would take around with me to conferences and say, look, kids are really talking about this. And before I was ready to share my own data or think about how I could, there was this clip that showed up that was on CNN, and I want to play it for you and have you think about how the voice of this second grader resonates with you as you hear her. So Michelle Obama went to visit this school in Maryland.
Mom said our mom saw Barack Obama. My mom said that I think that she says that Barack Obama is taking everybody away that doesn't pass papers.
Yeah, well, that's something that we have to work on, right? To make sure that people can be here with the right kind of papers, right? That's exactly right. Yeah, well, we have to work on that. We have to fix that. And that everybody's got to work together in Congress to make sure that that happens.
So take a moment if you would. I see reactions, I feel them happening. Jot them down, and we'll have time.
I remember my gut going very quickly on Twitter and quoting the right kind of papers.
Right. And we have to fix that. What are we fixing? Who, or how does a child hear that?
I've been there. Every pen.
Could be parallel. So I'll keep talking, you keep jotting. I know that speaking to you all and learning from you all this morning that, we heard from our colleagues in Queens, your children are bringing these kinds of comments to the classroom and to the school, right? I think the other thing that is significant and that the book takes up is that a lot of the really prominent and important research that has shifted policy, that has helped to amplify perspectives on young people from immigrant families, young adults, that has shaped the conversation about DACA from colleagues that that we have among us and in higher education. one of the things, aside from a methodological question, which the book talks about, is also the moment in which the data collection was conducted, right? So I think it has to be said that if we look at that 10-year span, 2013 to 2023, the young people, the students that are in elementary schools today have grown up in an era of ICE, right? And then after 9/11, after Trump presidency, and so I think their sense of consciousness, what their kitchen table conversations are like, what their, just the ambient newsreels in bodegas, in their homes, and in radios and cars, is very different than if you grew up before that, right? And so I want to name that I think that's also part of the conciencia, right, and the consciousness of the children that we know and care about. So I'm going to take us into sort of two paths. One will be artifacts of the intersections of immigration and education. I want to talk a little bit about Plyler versus Doe and the Supreme Court ruling essentially that protects all students' rights to a public education regardless of their or their parents, caregivers, immigration status. And then we'll hear some voices from children, and then I will close. So the Plyler court case, right, which made its way from Plyler, Texas to the U.S. Supreme Court, was decided in 1982, and the book gets into more of the detail, but for today, what's important to know, I think, and you may certainly already know, is that what was at issue in the Plyler case was a local superintendent who wanted to withhold funds or essentially charge families tuition for enrolling in public school, right? Undocumented families tuition. And so he wanted to either deny them enrollment or withhold the funds, and those would be interrelated mechanisms, right? And what the Supreme Court ruled at the time was that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution prohibits denying any students the rights to a public education. And so we're still operating from a place of Plyler versus Doe. Today, it's been a really, really consequential ruling. Salud. Part of what the ruling said, the argumentation said, quote, that the Plyler law in Texas was directed against children and imposed a discriminatory burden on the base of a legal characteristic over which children can have little control. It is thus difficult to conceive of a rational justification for penalizing these children for their presence within the United States, end quote. And so some of the promises of Plyler has been really, really meaningful, right? Is that it's provided equal access to education under the 14th Amendment, and it's had a really important role in other cases and other litigation, both in terms of state level referenda and also other attempts at undermining these rights for over 3 decades, right? So it's been a really important precedent. Some of the pitfalls, though, is that children, even in this very brief quote, right, are pitted against their parents. So children are the innocent ones and parents are the criminal ones who brought them here. But children didn't have control over that situation, right, over the circumstances of their coming. And so it's something that our colleagues and activists that I admire have been working against, that kind of pitting one part of the immigrant community against another for decades, right? And so thinking about how to really lift up the humanity of all, whether it's a day laborer, an undocumented parent, the children, etc., but all together, thinking about policy that can sustain all of our humanity. And I think that the other part of this kind of narrative, which gets taken up in other places, and the book explores, is that children then get cast as innocent, right? They're innocent of their parents' wrongdoings, quote unquote, and they're also therefore ignorant of knowing of the realities, and that's something the book seeks to work against. So Plyler in New York, it seems worth saying that in 2010, the state education department issued guidance, right? So you figure the Supreme Court issued a ruling. All kids have the right to school, public school, K-12. But they didn't say how to uphold that right, right? So then it was the work of state education departments, educators, superintendents to figure out how do we implement, how do we preserve this right? And so the state education department in New York says the following, quote, while Plyler did not expressly address the issue of whether a school district may inquire about a student's immigration status at the time of enrollment, the decision is generally viewed as prohibiting any district actions that might, quote, chill or discourage undocumented students from receiving a free public education. Accordingly, at the time of registration, schools should avoid asking questions related to immigration status or that may reveal a child's immigration status, such as asking for a social security number. Now, the ACLU around that same time surveyed New York's 694 school districts and found that at least 139 were asking, either directly or indirectly, for proof of a parent or child's immigration status before the student could enroll in school. So it's a point at which our schools are sitting at the intersection, very explicitly, of immigration and education. And Plyler has been taken up in terms of how it's been implemented as this question of proof of residency, right? So how do children and families prove they live in a place? Now some of this, in the way that all of this is always in flux, some of this has changed, right? So now, given the green light law, one could ask for a driver's license and not necessarily be asking for disclosure. But prior to 2019, that could have been a way of knowing whether someone was documented or here with legal permission, right? So in 2014, the Federal Department of Justice and Department of Education issued this Dear Colleague letter on school enrollment, mandating that school districts must ensure that they do not discriminate on the basis of race, color, or national origin, and that students are not barred from enrolling in public schools at the elementary or secondary levels, this is a K-12 ruling, on the basis of their own citizenship or immigration status, either theirs or of their parents or guardians, and that we as educators may not request information with the purpose or result of denying access to public schools on the basis of race, color, or national origin. So one of the things I worry about as a teacher, as a person in the world, as a researcher, is that this kind of protection comes at the price of invisibility. It's basically don't ask, don't tell, right? And while that's important, that we don't have people asking after immigration status, that never want to undermine the importance of it, for all of you who are, for example, speaking about culturally responsive pedagogy, about social emotional learning, how do we best serve students if we can't see them, right? And how do we see them in a way that is not a surveillance and kind of gaze, right, and a policing kind of gaze? So I think that that is a double bind that we haven't really had much of a chance to talk about as a community, as an educational community. And I also worry that this focus on enrollment, on like proof of residency, means that we overlook all these other moments in the life of a student where they experience these chilling effects, right? So it's not just when they come to register, but throughout a kid's life, throughout a family's life, as you all are so thoughtful about, when are the moments when they feel excluded or right out scared of coming to school? So if you would take a moment before we turn to some artifacts in children's voices, in what ways does this double bind resonate with you? This bind of having to protect by not talking about, but also wanting to serve well by making visible. How does that land for you? How can we work towards justice with and for students whose strengths and needs go unspoken? So now this is my ethnographer's lens, and I will share with you some of the examples that I've been able to witness and then represent for folks not in the homes or the schools where I've been, but in homes and schools that will resonate. I'm going to share a few artifacts from Pennsylvania and then from New York City of school documents that evoke citizenship and school documents that I've seen travel from home to school, like in backpack mail or in other forms, and then watched as parents try to make sense of, right? Parents in mixed status families. And then we'll turn to students' own words and then on words. So when I conducted my dissertation in Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania, this was between 2008 and 2010, I was in homes. I was primarily in homes. And so I had a home vantage on the school. And I wanted to share these two documents that came from schools into homes. These were elementary schools that for schools were attempts at establishing points of contact and connection with homes, but when they arrived, scared parents, essentially. And these were undocumented parents in mixed status families where the oldest children were undocumented, and in elementary and middle school, and younger children were born in the US. And so one was a report card. And so we can see here that the report card, among other things like attendance and grades for subject matter, also had a citizenship mark. And it was outstanding, satisfactory, or needs improvement. And the citizenship mark was kind of a composite. It was homework, it was attendance, it was participation. And yet when the homework or when the citizenship grade arrived at home, the parents were anxious. And the conversations that ensued right away as they were asking me to broker and make sense of the grade, the conversations that ensued as they turned to their children were very much about citizenship, not in a metaphorical sense, like are you being a good community member, but in a quite literal sense, like if you don't get your grades up, you'll end up cleaning bathrooms like me, right? Or I worry for you because of your status. But the school could never have imagined, I don't think, that that was what would be evoked. It was an attempt at opening a line of communication. Here's how your child is doing. But that phrase citizenship meant something very different. Another was this official notice of child's illegal absence, which was the district's attempt at curbing truancy. Right? Why was the parent in this particular family not sending their child to school? Where the paternal the paternal figure in the home had been deported just weeks prior. And so in the scramble to find livable, affordable housing and new employment, the 3 children in the home were missing school quite a bit. And the school sent home this notification. Again, one could read it as an attempt at establishing a line of communication, but the language of illegality, of needing to show up in court potentially, was quite scary to this family. And so these moments, again, of bids for communication between home and school really aligned the school with a sense of immigration and authority and policing. More recently, and in New York City, in order to enroll in the free and reduced price lunch, which is a marker we use, right, for knowing who our children are, for a moniker for poverty, right, as Dr. Piper said, the form came home in New York City with a letter that explained to parents how they should complete the form. And at the top of the letter, it said, all children, regardless of their immigration status, are eligible for the school meals program and the milk program. But as the parent, went to complete the form, they encountered then a spot where they did need to provide either the last 4 digits of the social or check a box if they weren't able to provide it. And so those moments are like halting moments, right? I've been in homes where, like these, where the parent, even with the bold, underlined, translated text, encounters that as an anxiety-producing moment, and one that then causes these chill effects. And so if you figure, part of the broader project is how do these forms of consciousness and connection and the circulation of these different meanings of citizenship, how do they shape participation, right? So when we think about communities, mixed status communities, and their connections to school, how might a moment like this shape the subsequent invitation to come to parent-teacher conference or to come to a community event? Or so these are some of those artifacts. Now, in students' own words, how do they make sense of it? Remember, I met these young people who are now 20 and 21 when they were 9 and 10. So they were 5th graders. And in our after-school data analysis meetings, we came to call them a grupo de análisis. And this was the one where they themselves insisted on my, reporting back in good fashion, really important ways. We would come together, and so sometimes I would plant a topic of conversation in a provocative sense to get us talking. And so on this one day, I said to them, a lot of people think you don't know. about immigration status. And you'll hear me talking and you'll hear them talking, and I want to share what they said when I told them that.
Piensan que los estudiantes no se dan cuenta de su estatus migratorio, digamos, que si tienen papeles, no tienen papeles, tienen visa, lo que sea, no se dan cuenta hasta que tengan 16, 17 años. Porque dicen que no es hasta que ustedes soliciten un trabajo o una licencia o una beca para la universidad que se den cuenta de que sí tienen o no tienen papeles. Pero es una mentira. Yo noto que ustedes tienen otra diferencia o que creen que sean mentiras. O quiero que me ayuden a entender.
Eso es una mentira. Bueno, no mentira, porque algunos sí no lo saben. Otros sí lo saben. Sus padres, como mi padre. Ajá. Entonces, que a veces sí no se enteran, pero a veces sí, como sus papás son valientes y saben cómo controlar la situación, de decirle, no, tú no puedes esto, tú vas a tener que estudiar, hacer todas las cosas que tienes que conseguir papeles porque no sé cómo hacerlo por ti.
Ajá.
Y es muy difícil. Pero lo que tienes que estudiar. Y yo siempre yo sé que yo tengo que estudiar y cosas así porque si no estudio ni nada, entonces.
Ok, so
Tiene una boleta que siempre
tiene efecto, ok. So tú ya sabes porque tus padres te lo dicen, por ejemplo.
Algunos niños no saben eso, tal vez porque ellos vinieron acá bien pequeños,
Es lo que dicen.
pequeños, y
I'll say one more part.
Bien.
ellos crecen como que si fueran niños así de ricos, no ricos, pero así sino que, bueno, ellos no ponen mente en eso, sino que crecen con sus amigos y todo así, they get distracted, y algunos otros niños saben que lo que ellos pasaron porque tal vez ellos tuvieron mucho, como cuando iban pasando tuvieron muchas dificultades y esas dificultades siempre ellos no tienen en mente, tal vez cuando comienzan la escuela escriben de eso o están leyendo más de eso para ver qué es lo que pasa y bueno, creo que es lo que
Ok. So, yo creo que quizás no saben porque tienen más dinero, no saben porque sus papás no se lo dijeron.
A mí los papás tienen mucho miedo de cómo reaccionar.
Son, pero individual. Ok. Porque yo veo que mi trabajo con ustedes son muy conscientes, ¿no? De todo eso.
So after that initial visceral reaction, like, whoa, that's a lie, right? Then they start to unpack, again, in a very intersectional way, thinking about parental preference, parental fear of children's reactions, class, children's own border crossing experiences and how they carry those realities and memories with them throughout a lifespan. And so, of course, with more time and in the broader project, this is part of the unpacking, right? Is how do they understand this and how do they speak back? And then with the instances of home and school life, how does that show up and how can we bear witness? There's the other dimension I think all of you as teachers will really appreciate is like how much is going on at any one given time in a conversation, right? So the train's passing and the children are fidgeting but over time part of what I came to see is that fidgeting actually is, they're communicating something also, right? They're communicating this is uncomfortable or this is a hard conversation to have. And so I think there's something in both what they're saying explicitly and then how they're moving their bodies, how they're expressing themselves in other ways that we can tune into. So I'm going to close with just two final examples, and this is the question that I think is on all of our minds if I may say, and that I've heard you thinking about today and really modeling so many ways into answering the question of how educator pedagogy in academic assignments and in social emotional learning activities shapes undocumented students, immigrant families, mixed status communities more broadly, experiences of inclusion or isolation. And how thoughtful y'all are about that, like thinking about how PS 340 modeled for us how not only in the classroom but at the level of the whole school, of community events, of how to signal who's invited and who's not, and refusing the idea that nobody is unwelcome, right? But on the to say quite explicitly, as children said in Queens, that you belong here, and I'm happy you're here, right? I mean that's I think what we're all striving for. So very briefly, we have Ruth and Lupe, two of the young women who you saw were my co-presenters just last week, both born in Latin America, both lived with their grandmothers pre-migration, now lived in Brooklyn at the time when I started, attended the same dual language elementary school, and both were undocumented in early childhood. I think something that matters for what you'll see in a moment is that Lupe left Mexico for the US at age 2 and remains undocumented. So today, 10 years later, right? And Ruth left El Salvador for the US at the age of 6 and was able to obtain her legal permanent resident status as a child and was very attuned. At the time I met her, she was describing that process in great detail for me. And of course, their own family histories, household compositions made for those differential trajectories and immigration policy, of course. But I think it will matter when you see a homework assignment that they received in 6th grade, right? So they graduated, gone on to middle school. They were in the pretty standard unit on geography and immigration, and the teacher created a worksheet that children needed to complete. So prompts, essentially scripts for an oral history with their families. What countries does your family come from? What continents does your family come from? Who in your family moved to the United States? Grandma, uncle, great-grandfather, and so on. How did your family come to the United States, and why did your family come to the United States? And the young people explained to me that the goal was going to be to create, a visual representation, a map of the world with yarn and points of connection and images. And the broader assignment is analyzed in the book. But they had very different responses to this assignment. So Lupe, who you recall, said, is undocumented and from Mexico, says, what I think I would say to this is, I'm from Mexico, but when they ask me if I have papers, I say yes. So always preempting, right? And thinking about how to be protective of her family and her loved ones. And Ruth, who by this point had obtained her green card, essentially, said, I would feel like proud because I feel that someone cares about other people, and it's not just me, but rather I want to know about other people, where they come from, why they came here if they're immigrants, who started the immigration. And for a decade, I've watched as these young people have had these differential approaches to being able to disclose or disguise. And so Ruth, even as recently as last week, wanted to say certain things about who she is with the stated purpose of changing public perception of immigrants. And Lupe strives to do that and does that on the regular as well, but has a different set of constraints and concerns around the risks and responsibilities of disclosure. This will be my last example and we'll close. So that was 6th grade. We go back to 5th grade. It's the social emotional learning class that they had once a week. And the teacher on this day, or at this moment, was doing a unit on diversity and asked the children to work in small groups to define diversity. And so I want to play for you what that sounded like in that moment. And again, you'll recognize like all the talk and all the things going on in the classroom at once. But I want you to tune in especially for line 17. And what happens when Lupe, who's the one holding the marker, when someone says border. That's what happens.
Countries have more likes. Colors. You can discriminate. That's right. We put colors.
no, pero
Games.
Use another color, use another different colors. Use another color.
Language.
No, I ain't green.
Right? Oh yeah, right on language. Somebody write language.
Language.
I read language.
Super subtle.
Super subtle. And so again, I've been listening to these tapes for 10 years, and the young people know it, and they're not totally weirded out by that because they've been listening to them with me. But they cringe when they hear their voice in audio for sure. But interesting, right? So throughout the whole time, Lupe is reframing. So someone says cultures, and she writes, or rather countries, and she writes cultures, right? That telling moment when one of her peers says border, because some people crossed the border and some people didn't, and that is a reflection of diversity in their community. And it takes a few moments, right? Someone else kind of starts freestyling. It's an interesting connection between border, independent, and then Lupe says chill, chill, which is an interesting play on words given the chilling effects, right? But chill, I won't put that, I'm not putting that, I'm not writing nothing, I don't want to write anything. So you can imagine like this moment of a pause, of a shutdown, again, that kind of halting. But she rises, she always has. I'm not writing nothing, but then games. So I'm going to reframe. You can all play games. Right? And then language, immigration, and again, she refuses. I'm not writing, she doesn't say it, but she doesn't write immigration, she writes language. So these moments of, even for a student who is such a participant in the class, she refuses. And she has worries and concerns about when these topics come up. And so the book kind of analyzes these over a lifespan. And so, in closing, there's so much that I really want to hear from you about what we have to say. And I'm also aware that there is delicious food. And so we will make it all happen in the ways that we can over the rest of the afternoon and beyond. But, we've seen just how much children know. You know just how much children know. And we've seen how their knowledge of immigration status shapes their participation in school. So the things that are on my mind are, what are the risks students experience daily, and what are our responsibilities to them? And so things like, when are these words evoked in your school context? Citizenship, global citizens. When do they come up, and how might we have a preconception of what they mean versus, considering from this ethnographic point of view what they might mean to families or students. How does this talk, in the words of the second grader in Maryland, how does Lupe's words and Ruth's words make you rethink perhaps the significance of citizenship? And then how are you thinking in this moment about your own responsibility to break silences around citizenship and schooling? And I hope that this is a moment, a granito de arena in us breaking those silences and thinking in solidarities. And so I will pause here and I will make eye contact with one of our agenda and facilitators, and thank you all for
I think it's important to do questions and open it up to people having any thoughts, questions, comments. I'll pass it on to Tammy if you want to kind of moderate the questions or have it.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ariana. That was wonderful.
And Ariana provided some questions for thought, not only here but throughout her presentation, and you jotted things down, and maybe we even just take a moment to just take it all in and think. And then if you have a question or would like to make a comment.
And the second question, you say make you rethink the significance of citizenship. So when my kids were little, they asked me, so they realized that we were living in Rochester. They realized that we were different.
Yeah.
So they asked me, I remember, Dad, how do you come to the United States? I told them joking. I was well when I came. But no, I came as a student. So I came as a student, I explained to them, I came as a student. And then the other question they asked me, how did you become a U.S. citizen? I said, well, when I married my mom, she was American citizen. Thank God, she gave me citizenship. But these are questions that kids they have.
Yes.
They have even, and it depends how we answer. I just thank God because so I came as a student and so my kids I feel more secure. But I see students that their parents came illegally and so they're struggling inside their heart, you know. Like the girls, I don't want to write anything about border. So it's hard for them. Hard for them. That's the question made me rethink.
Yeah.
Think about my own life.
Thank you for that,
Yeah.
Maria. Yes, and I think they're so astute. You know, in the midst of the hard, I have also been humbled and really myself strengthened to be to work as an accomplice, right? By seeing the tremendous strengths and the maturity of children this young, right? Who can understand when we have conversations about how the constructions of what is accepted or not accepted, of these terms like legal or not legal, right? Which are not essential terms. They're invented, right? And the young people themselves refuse to be considered anything but fully human and fully, you know, finding their way. And so I think that's telling also the questions they ask and how they respond to our questions, right?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you just said too, because I think as educators, we were brought up through certain systems as well. So sometimes like even just bringing these words up, it causes pause. Students are on technology all the time and they are coming to us as the adults around them asking so many questions like gender, sexuality. We already know, we're like, wait, what? We're having to go through all these very challenging conversations with them, but we have, you know, we have young kids coming to us.
Yeah.
So we have to have these conversations more and more with the people around us because it is definitely, you know, we have these systems in our systems already created in our own ways of thinking that sometimes we need people like you to come and sort of just rock our world and be like, right, this is not okay. We need to reframe our own thinking. We need to have our staff do that. Otherwise, we have our students coming to us and we're not prepared.
Right. And it takes practice, right? I mean, you were talking about it as a school community. Anna, you said that, you know, you were having courageous conversations. This requires, you know, our own professional risk-taking to say we don't know the answers, but we need to think through it together. It requires taking risks and hearing each other's points of views, some that we may share, some that we may not. But I think that my hope is that the book and moments like this where, again, you know, to spend the day with you is so meaningful is it's practice in having conversations that we may not have on a daily basis, and that actually, in a humbling sense, like the students we serve might be having them daily, right? Are certainly, and we know that. And so, how do we keep up with them and respond sensitively, lovingly? Right. Thank you for that.
For me, you know, something that I would really love to think more about is the silences and what is revealed through those silences, more than what is actually said. It's just, that's very powerful.
Thank you, Tammy. That has been a joy for me, thinking about how to understand language by also recognizing how much goes unsaid, right? And how much in schools we think about like what children produce as evidence of what they know, but also that reframe of they know enough not to say, right? And how do we like account for that when we focus on what they do say, importantly as well, right? But that both ends. Thank you.
I think that sort of how prevalent the word citizen is in schools, but also in the media, you know, and just, and I think how Recently, we were talking at Lehman College with our department. We had to sort of pick certain identities, and one of them was citizen. And so, for people who are citizens, how you never think about it. You know what I mean? That may, you know what I mean? That it doesn't
Very brief.
occur all the impact, all the ways in which it can impact. But even like with how much pride we wear that I voted today, or we could, and I mean, just all the ways in which it quiets, it silences people also.
Yeah.
So the ways, yeah. So there are the silences, but there are also ways to silence people.
Yes, yes.
Not just exclude.
And it makes me think too about like common knowledge. What common knowledge do we have, or sometimes we think others have? When I was taking classes in one of our institutions, and we are all teachers, and another student asked the professor, and we are getting ready to become leaders in the school, and she asked the professor is Dutch, the professor was a teacher here in New York City. She was also a principal, and now she was training administrators. And one of my compañeras, she asked, "Can you vote?" to the professor. And for me, it was like mind-boggling because I know the process because I have gone through the process.
Yeah.
So it's like, wait a minute, in New York City, it's even hard to be an administrator or to be a teacher. So it's like how much everyone else knows, even, and sometimes we think that a lot of things are common knowledge, but if you have not gone through the process, there's a lot that you don't know, and that you're still learning. Yeah. Even when you go through the process, there are a lot of things that I'm still learning.
Absolutely. And I think the implications then, we talk as the leadership of CUNY-I about the implications for higher education, right? And how are we continuing to learn as, as professors, as folks working in solidarity, and all of the ways we think of ourselves and roles we play, but also what is our responsibility to change, say, for example, coursework, right? Do all teacher ed candidates need coursework in immigration?
Yes.
As well. Right, we would say that. Do our administrators and school leaders like essentially thinking about what are the structures and ways that we can have these conversations. And in the absence, on a national level, let's say, of a real role modeling from our political leaders of how to have these conversations completely, robustly, even if there's disagreement, which inevitably, there is in the world. But what are then the spaces for us to moderate and really facilitate meaningful discussion?
And even one of our teachers had a student teacher, and our teacher and the student teacher were both African Americans. And the African American student teacher asked the teacher, "Oh my God, you have so many students who are learning the language. What a burden." And she was like, "No, it's not a burden. For me, it's an honor to have all the students here in my classroom. And this is part of the process. I myself make sure that I have the students who are new to the country. I ask for that." So it was like, we need them also in higher education, like you said, like to continue to have this conversation.
Well, and I think, and I know maybe I could pause after this comment, but I think part of what I hope for our work together as CUNY-I is how we build solidarities through these conversations, right? So when I think about the 14th Amendment, which was such an important part of our country's history, and the abolition of slavery, and the legal, at least, establishment of a concept of humanity that was, not simply white, how that foundational text continues to be a space where we leverage rights for people of undocumented status or immigration, right? So the potential for solidarity between, and then the understanding that our immigrant category does not preclude blackness. right? But that, as we know from the CUNY-IIE grounding principles, you know, we, as an immigrant community, are multiracial, and that's one. And then thinking about language explicitly, there are so many points of solidarity between language restriction, language justice in the Black community, African American, Black from all over the world, and all of us serving English learners. And so, yeah, so I think those reframes too, where we build in capacity and solidarity, is where I hope this book can go, and where I know we are all working together. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.